Hey everybody, Andy Kvernen here with another Cornerstone Connection Daily Devotional. This last week, I was listening to a podcast or a radio broadcast, I'm not even sure what it was, and I heard somebody say something again that resonated with me. It's resonated with me every time I've heard it. I've heard it several times in my life. They said, one of the most important life skills you can ever learn is the ability to laugh at yourself. And man, that's so true. When I think about my life and the story that God has been writing in my life, I look back to my early childhood. I was just describing recently to a friend, I think it was this last Sunday, how for me, when I used to golf as a kid, I thought I was supposed to be a really good golfer. And I had high expectations for myself. And when I was out on the golf course, I was there to conquer the golf course. I was there to win, even in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. And I remember being really frustrated when my golf shot didn't meet my expectations. And I was the kid, you better believe, that would throw a club once in a while, that would threaten to break it over his knee. That I didn't do that because I was too cheap. I didn't want to have to replace it. But the kid that would huff and puff and kind of just make a scene on the golf course when my golf game didn't meet my expectations. I took myself really seriously. And that was true not only in golf, but in life, in basketball. When somebody would tell a joke at my expense, it'd really bother me. And I spent a lot of time fretting over myself, really, over thinking that I ought to be at a certain level, and I wasn't, and it really bothered me. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that's totally solved for me, but there came a point over time when I learned that, hey, I don't have to be that big a deal. And in fact, it's okay to laugh at myself. And it was amazing how much edge that took off of life for me. And it reminds me of a really beautiful, really important passage that Peter writes in his first letter, his first epistle. In 1 Peter chapter 5, I want to read to you just a couple of verses. And Peter, as he's exhorting the church, he's telling them, look, here's how elders ought to function, and they ought to not lord over the people that they're leading, but they should do so with humility and whatnot. He gets to verses 6 and 7, and he says this. He says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you." Now, I've read that passage. I even preached that passage, but it just dawned on me as I was reading that here today, this beautiful juxtaposition. Peter writes, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." In other words, exercise humility. Be sober about yourself and let God do the lifting up. Don't try to manage people's impressions of you. Don't try to present yourself as something that you're not. Don't have such high expectations for yourself that there's nowhere to go but down. Humble yourself and let God lift you up. But then he puts right next to it in the same paragraph, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Why does Peter talk about anxiety at the same time he's talking about humility? Well, I think the two go hand in hand. The more that we think about ourselves, the more self-conscious we become, the more worried about what other people think that we are, the more anxious we become. But the more that we learn to take ourselves less seriously and to say, okay, you know what? God has me here for a purpose. God is doing something in me. I'm not going to worry about elevating my status. I'm not going to worry about managing impressions. Instead, I'm going to let God do the lifting up, and then I can be less anxious before him and before other people. Friends, for me, humility and anxiety have gone hand in hand. The less I think about myself, the less anxious I am, the more God does the work of sustaining me and strengthening me and giving me hope. I'm prone to slip in. I'm prone to slip into thinking about myself too much. You better believe anxiety comes. And friends, I want to be the kind of guy that thinks less about himself, is less anxious, lets God lift him up, and in turn, I'm more available to others for God's glory. Maybe God would do that in you today as well. Friends, don't be anxious about anything. Put your trust in Jesus. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And in that, let him lift you up. If you do, I'm convinced you'll be less anxious. God bless you, friends. Have a great day. And Lord willing, we'll see you again soon on the Cornerstone Connection.